Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna put that up on my screen. So with that, I think I'm gonna hand it over to Mahalia and let her take over here and walk through this tracker and what's going on with the sequence of services that we're thinking of. Mahalia?
Good morning, everybody. So as Anson said, I'm going to share my screen with you real quick, and maybe this will get a couple of questions that you guys have right off the bat. So one thing that I want everybody to kind of keep in mind is that this is going to be, we're really going to be focusing on the process today for new students. New students are people who currently are not in teams, meaning they're not in a class in teams. Individuals that you are currently serving that were in like a brick and mortar class and you're transitioning them over to a remote learning, we want you to continue to track those individuals in teams just as you always have, given the guidance that we have already put out around direct hours versus proxy hours, etc. So today is really going to be focusing on those of you that want to serve new students that are coming in. Anson and all of us are kind of forecasting that we're going to have new people that want to come into the system and receive services. So we wanted to give you some guidance on that. So in a general overview, the first thing to keep in mind is that all new students, we're still requiring them to have an enrollment form and a release of information form during their intake process. You will take that information and you're going to put that in Teams. So you got to kind of think of this, I think, moving forward as sort of a three-pronged process. So we're still going to require a participant record and a participant profile in Teams. So as you're collecting those intake forms and the information on those forms, that will still go in Teams to sort of generate this unique Teams record and unique Teams participant ID number for all new students coming in. So think of it as a placeholder. Then after that, we'll be moving to a class level information, which is what I'm going to go over with you on an external tracker that we're going to be providing for to you guys on class level information. And that is going to be tracked externally, obviously, because you can't supply new students with a usable test right now. So there's no ability to put that into Teams at the moment. And then the last thing is going to be all the daily accrued contact time, whether that's direct hours or proxy hours, will also be tracked externally through a locally developed tracker. Okay, so all that contact time that's getting accrued either through remote learning or through a approved distance learning curriculum is going to be tracked externally out of Teams for new students on a locally developed form. So that's just kind of a general overview, and that may answer quite a few questions for you guys. I'm going to now go and want to share with you the actual tracker itself, and then we'll kind of get into the details that are listed out in the FAQ that you guys sent questions in on. I think that's probably the best way to go. So give me just a second here and I'll get the tracker pulled up.
And Elena, why don't you explain to everybody how, since we're assuming everybody knows how to use Teams very well, describe how to show the chat so they can enter some chat info.
Sure, thanks, Samson. So just a little bit about it. As you are coming in, you will notice that you were put into a lobby before you could be admitted. And so when you're trying to get in, just wait a few minutes as we're adding people to the from the lobby into the meeting. We will accept you. You don't have to leave and try again. When you're in the meeting and you move your mouse, you're going to see a little toolbar come up in the middle. It's going to show that the meeting is being recorded on the left-hand side, give you access to your camera, your microphone. There's a screen share button that we're not going to be using today for all the participants, but if needed, Someone in the meeting could share their screen as Anson and Mahalia are doing now. You'll see 3 dots, which is an ellipsis. You can show meeting notes or different settings that are there, go to full screen or not. Then you'll see a little chat conversation box that usually has a red dot if there is anybody that has put anything in the chat. So if you click on the conversation, it'll pull up a toolbar to your right-hand side, and you'll see everything that's being posted. The next icon on the ribbon is the participants icon. It'll show who's in, and it'll show who's on the meeting or waiting in the lobby. So I'm not sure if everyone who's a guest will have the participants icon, but you may be able to see that.
Awesome, thanks. Thank you for that, Elena. So going back to the tracker here for just a second. So this is kind of what we're going to be releasing for that class level, which is the second piece there, to you guys to use locally. So a couple of things about this. The first thing is we're trying to build this thing. I'm saying we're building it like a tank. And what I mean by that is I'm trying to make it as simple as it can be for you guys locally. And I want to create it so that there's no PII in this, which is why we are requiring you to create a participant record and a participant profile in Teams to generate a Teams participant ID. That's a very thoughtful thing so that when you do this class level tracker, there's no PII in it. So you can put it in a Google Drive, you can put it in a stored location where multiple people can go in and work off of one document. You can also choose to, give one of these to each of your providers if you're in a large consortia and have them track it at a provider level and then consolidate later. So we're trying to make this thing as simple as we possibly can, but still allow you to collect the information that we know we're going to need in the future. That being said, the first 2 columns here, column A and B, are just grantee information. And the way that this is currently built, and Christine Long did just a great job, is we utilized whatever was currently in Teams for this program year in terms of who your providers are. So you can go into the spreadsheet, you will select your grant recipient. Here I have Amarillo on the screen. Once you select your grant recipient, let me pick somebody that has multiple partners. Once you select your grant recipient, it's going to automatically create a drop-down filter that has the providers that you have listed in Teams. So if your community action and the provider that's going to be using this tracker is Austin Community College, that's who you would select. The rest of this in columns D all the way through L are going to be their student level information. So this is real simple. Last name, first name. Columns G and H are going to be to help you do cleanup after we're kind of over this COVID-19 and we're trying to go back and possibly enter students into the system or do any kind of data cleanup or documentation cleanup. So G is enrollment form. Was it signed? Yes or no? Some of you are going to have some issues with getting digital signatures. Some of you are going to have some issues with getting, hard copy signatures, obviously. So this is just a real clean way for you to say, was this something that was accomplished initially in our remote process? Yes or no? For both of those. The student information in column I here is what we're calling the eligibility and how you're determining eligibility during this time when we cannot use an NRS approved test.
Mahalia,
So
can you
in
zoom
the,
up?
yes. What's that, Anson?
Can you zoom up a little bit, please?
Yes.
There we go.
There we go. So in the meeting invite for this particular meeting, we included a document which is basically for new student enrollment. In that, there is a section on intake, or there's a section on self-attested eligibility. And define some options in that document. So one of the options in the document is going to be whether or not they have a high school equivalency. Another one is if you're identifying them as an English language learner. Another possibility is an individual that maybe has their high school equivalency or their high school diploma, but through this intake process, you talking to them, the filling out of the enrollment form, Pearl information, or communication that you've had with them, you're basically making a determination through that self-attested knowledge that they're probably basic skills deficient, or they're likely to be. So we are requesting that you select which option you use to identify that student initially during the remote intake process. And again, if you'll open that document in the meeting maker and scroll to the self-attested eligibility section, you'll see some more information and guidance on that piece. The next thing here is going to be the participant ID number. So again, that's why there's sort of this sequential process in how you're going to need to do this, because in an effort to make this thing very shareable and people to be able to be this at multiple times, not have PII in here, the participant ID number is kind of a crucial piece to this process. We went ahead and included a LAN number for those of you that are using that. You can also use that to look students up in Teams in the future if you want to go back. The enrollment date is calendar based. So when you go and you want to select the enrollment date, which really should be whatever date the intake occurred and prior to the student being placed into a remote learning class or a distance learning class or whatever that placement is going to be, you would select whatever the enrollment date is just based off of the calendar here, and the timestamp is we're trying to work that out in the final product that comes out next week. We're hoping to get that removed. So don't worry about the timestamp process, just select it by the date. The next section in the document is really the class level information. So right now we can still build classes in Teams, but if you have new students coming in, you can't add them to classes. So we are basically asking you to give us that information here so that in the future you can go back and add those participants into classes in Teams in the future, perhaps. There's a lot of, we just don't know what we don't know right now, but we're trying to make this so that we can collect as much information to make any data entry that we're going to be requesting in the future the easiest, I think, for you guys to go back and kind of make apples to apples of it. So the class name here in column N, class number in column O is just going to be based off of what you have in Teams currently. And then column P is going to be the class start date. And this too, for the class start date, is a actual calendar drop down. So this can be based off of, maybe it's a brand new class that you've created and it's just something brand new. What we've really heard from the field in terms of classes is kind of two buckets. One is that you're basically taking the brick and mortar classes that you already had and you're just creating a virtual or remote learning space for those classes, and they just keep the same schedule and everything's pretty much the same, but you're just moving it to a remote option. The second bucket is really because of how staffing and instructors are at the local level, and some of them have greater digital skills than others, better technology skills than others. You guys are kind of expanding the number of students that those instructors are assigned to delivering content to. And what does that look like? So those are kind of the two big buckets that we've heard about. Again, in the chat, you can give us some other examples that some of you are having to utilize. But this class start date is basically just when did the student enter into that remote learning option or that distance learning option as a new student coming into the program. The coursework, what you'll notice here is
Mahalia,
that this is, yes.
let's take a little break, and we got some questions coming in.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Joe Arrington from McLennan Community College asked if they could save this on a cloud accessible server or something. What's your response to that?
Yes, so that's a really good question, and one reason why we built it this way, and we're very purposeful in the fact that there's no PII in the document. So you can save this to a cloud and have all of your providers, going in and utilizing this in that space if you want. For those of you that have very large consortia, if you wanted to provide a copy of this to each individual provider and have them fill it out and then consolidate it, that's an option. But it's going to be very shareable and very usable by many people. So yeah, you can totally do that with this tracker.
Very good. Everybody, if you looked in the chat, Courtney Arbor says hi. She's on a board conference call right now, but she was thanking everybody for keeping AL strong and students learning through COVID. Way to go. We hear great things and are touting your good work at TWC. Eva Cantwell asked if we could clarify the enrollment date.
So yeah, so the enrollment date would be whatever day that you have all the enrollment forms, the Pearl information completed by the participant. And I want to also stress the release of information during this time. I know a lot of the questions coming in have been really largely based on enrollment forms, but the release of information is still required, and we want to, make sure that students are still signing a release of information. The release of information is very important for us because in the future, if we do want to use this data and we do want to share this data with our federal partners, that's what gives us sort of that the ability for us to do that. So don't forget about that in terms of this remote intake. Yes. But it would be whatever day that is completed. You could use as your enrollment date.
And let's see what else we have here. Can column J and column K be set to text type so the ID numbers will retain zeros in the front? That's probably a Christine Long question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's make a note of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll make a note of that and get that corrected. Good point.
We had some questions about, thank you, Sarah Davidson. We had some questions about, was this sent out to providers or not? Could you clarify that, Mahalia?
Yeah, so what we did is I don't think this actually has been sent out to providers. No. We asked a few just for some initial feedback on using this approach, and was it understandable? Does it make sense on the actual new student enrollment document, but not on this tracker specifically. So this is the first time any of you guys are seeing this.
Okay, very good. Some people are saying they're getting removed from the room. It may be, I'm not exactly sure, but we're above 200, and I believe that's our limit. So it may be kicking people out, although
our limit is 250.
Oh, 250. Okay, then we're fine. So sorry you got removed, Norma Sendero.
If you get removed and try to enter again, I am looking and keeping track of the lobby. So just go ahead and give me a second to add you back in. I am going to mute everyone just to have that. And then Anson and Mahalia, go ahead and unmute yourselves.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, so we... Are there any other questions at this time? Okay, so we'll pick up kind of where we left off here, and Anson, just interrupt me if there
I
becomes
will.
some chat, and we'll go over those. I'll stop at the end of each section. So in column Q here, this coursework column has been, there's a drop down here that basically aligns to exactly how we would set a class up in teams. And all of this information under this class information section is purposeful to that. So when you, again, in the future, if we do want to go back and we end up getting to a space where we can go back and add these classes into teams, we want you to be able to have all the information that you need in order to do that. So under coursework, you're going to see all the coursework drop downs that we currently have in teams, minus the ones that we don't use. So you would select whatever coursework option makes the most sense for this individual student and what class they're going to be in. Distance learning model, and I want to thank Anne because I had a thoughtful conversation with her earlier, and I wanted to make sure that I go over this. So the distance learning model is really meant to reflect exactly what it currently reflects in teams, and this is really, are these students in their either distance learning or their remote learning hybrid distance learning class doing any kind of distance learning. So you would select whatever the distance learning model is there in the drop down, clock time mastery or teacher certification that you're going to be using for this individual student. And then obviously the distance learning curriculum that is cross-referenced from that specific model will be included in the drop down for the distance learning curriculum. So if the student, for instance, is not getting any distance learning and they're not using an approved software, you wouldn't select anything for those two columns. You would just leave them blank.
Okay, we got some more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we're checking on, there's several questions related to the recording. We're going to find out if this, how we can save this and send it, considering it'll be a big file. So we'll look into that. We realize it's very valuable. Joe Arrington asked again, he said, I did not ask my question well. When we develop the local hours tracker, can that be cloud-based also?
I think absolutely. So what I would really, and that's probably the one piece that we have not just, we just haven't had time to kind of get to that piece. But for those of you that are kind of very team savvy and know how Teams works, Teams currently has an export feature at the class level and an import feature at the class level. So I'm going to probably maybe develop a PowerPoint or a webinar or something to help you guys do that. But yes, you can do that and save it to a cloud as long as it doesn't have any PII in it. So two options there that I can see right away is using the Teams participant ID number or your locally assigned number, if that makes it easier for you guys when you're doing your contact hour level tracking for your classes. Or you can go into Teams to a class that you have right now and export those students and see how that kind of looks and how that functions, and you can create something locally based off of that as well. So we'll have some, I think some new guidance, or not new guidance, but further guidance on how you can do that. But absolutely, as long as there's no PII in it, you guys can track this in the cloud or in a network, or however you guys feel is the best way to get people to utilize it.
Got it. Tiffany Johnson asked, I know she commented that she thought Anne's idea was a good idea. Tammy Alexander asked, if we have students enrolled in more than one class, would we need to fill out a line for each class?
Wait, can you ask that one more time?
If we have students enrolled in more than one class, would we need to fill one line out for each class?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I would say yes. You can do that if you want to. I don't know if it would necessarily, if it would be necessary, and that'll make more sense when I go over the summary and kind of how we're using this information. But if you're going to have the students in more than one class, it's not going to hurt you to, put them on this tracker. We'll just have to unduplicate them whenever we get it.
Okay. Tara out there in Wharton asks, can you please elaborate more on how we can get permission for release of information from participants? And I think we're going to go over that in the FAQ.
Yeah, and that's a good question, I think, Anson, to add to the FAQ. So the release of information is just a form, so it would require a signature just like your enrollment form. So we have put some guidance, I think, out in the normal or the first FAQ that currently exists on TCall site about some options for that, for signatures and confirmation of acknowledgement. You can look there for some guidance, but a digital signature would work, something that you send to the student and ask them to acknowledge via, an email. That they confirm, that they've read the terms and conditions of the release and they're agreeing to those. That would also work. And we already have that guidance out there.
Good. We got several comments about how we can save this file. Thank you, guys. We'll work with TCall on the best way to do that for access. Let's see here.
This is Elena. I promise you all, I am not removing anyone from the meeting. I don't know if it's just saying my name because I made the meeting maker, but I am adding you all as fast as I can through the lobby. So if you get kicked out and come back in, just give it a second for it to admit you back.
Okay, another question from D. Ward. Can you clarify how students will sign paperwork? That's one of our FAQs.
Yeah, and that'll be something that we give a little bit of language on in the FAQ as well. We're really encouraging digital signatures. That can be done through, different platforms and applications. If you have Adobe Pro, you can create a digital signature in Adobe Pro. So you could put these, put your forms into a PDF and try to do it through an Adobe Pro software. There's DocuSign, of course, which may be a little more expensive, but there's, I think, some different ways that you can get an actual digital signature. The other thing that we explored, and Anson had provided some guidance, which is sort of this confirmation of agreement. I'm not really exactly sure of the wording that he used, but it's basically if you are emailing the forms to the person based off of they've signed up and they said, here's my email, this is my contact information. You email it to them and they respond and saying, I'm agreeing to the terms or I'm agreeing to the documentation. For right now, we would accept that. And if that is the route that you go and you don't actually have either a digital signature or a hard signature through a photocopy or some other method, then over here under the student information, you would want to select this and you would want to put no. So if you don't actually get a signature, like a hard signature or a digital signature, and you're just using like an email confirmation, I would say on this particular column G and H, put a no, and that's just going to flag you that in the future you would want to go back and attempt to get a hard signature for those individuals. Now, I know the very next question that someone's going to ask is, well, what about monitoring? Because I can feel that like coming through the screen at me. And we have addressed that on the FAQ as well, which we'll be going over a couple of those here in just a few minutes. And I'm going to give you some sort of explicit things that I want you to do in terms of comments. If you're unable to obtain a signature from a student, either they start the process and then they leave, and then through your follow-up, you're just not able to connect with them. Just know that we are very understanding during this time that there are going to be things like that are going to happen. So from a monitoring perspective, I don't want you guys stressing out too much about that. We're going to document heavily that this is a COVID-19 situation, and there's just going to be circumstances within that time frame. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of more here. One related to, and Susan asked about a repeat session of this, and yes, we will be doing a repeat because this is really, I didn't maybe preface this adequately. This is really just us getting feedback from you. This is not the final word. So we're taking all this stuff, we're taking notes, and we're going to work on it over the weekend. The tool and the guidance and the FAQ. So there's going to be a guidance document, a related FAQ, and then this tool at a minimum. And then we hope by midweek we will get all that cleaned up and ready to go after we get the federal guidance. And then either next Thursday or Friday or the following Monday or something, we will do another repeat. We'll probably do 2 of them to make sure we can get everybody. This is so important that we will do this until everybody just gets sick of us talking about it. Don Graybell from Alamo asked about can Canvas be used to document direct hours for training purposes? So they want to collect the hours in Canvas and then I guess report them through here. I think that's okay. What do you think, Amalia?
Yeah, and I'll go back. So some of you probably came in a little late. So if the students are already in teams and you're just moving to a remote learning option for those students, but you have already been tracking them in teams, you will continue to track those individuals into teams, regardless of the fact that you're kind of moving from a brick and mortar into a remote learning option for those students. If they're brand new students coming in and they're going into like an IET or a training or being enrolled or something like that, that is when this tracker comes into play. So you can use Canvas. We've put out some guidance in our FAQ that you can find on the TCAL COVID response page, specifically about the remote learning and the differentiation between remote learning and distance learning. So that would be a good resource, I think, for you to review on that specific topic, which is really how to use those remote learning platforms to generate direct contact time.
Eva Cantwell asks, how do we track the virtual classrooms, not distance learning, but live remote classes? And that's kind of in our other FAQ. So Eva, that question's addressed in the existing FAQ that's on the TCAL COVID-19 website. All right, let's go on and continue on so we can move to our FAQ.
I've just got a couple of more here, and the last ones I want to say, so T is going to be the assigned instructor, and we were going to try to create a drop down, but I know that you guys are probably going to be trying to add new staff and do some things just because of the skill set needed to do the remote learning at this time. So this is actually not going to be a drop down. It's just going to be you putting the person's name in there, whoever is assigned to that specific, whoever's teaching that student, basically. And then the columns U, V, and W, we're still figuring out, and we would love your feedback on this. This is going to be cumulative time that the student has completed. So again, going back to the process, since you are going to be putting your contact time, your direct hours, your proxy hours, and your training hours through a locally tracked spreadsheet or mechanism, what we're saying is, do we want to have you go into this tracker, since this is something that we're going to ask you guys to give to us and put in some cumulative time for us? So what I want feedback from you guys is, how difficult is that going to be? And again, this is only for new students that are not currently going to be in teams. So I don't know what the run on the bank is going to be for brand new instruction or new students coming in. I think it's going to vary from organization and grantee to grantee. But we're not expecting, this sheet to really be able to track 15,000 students. This is really for just brand new students coming in into our system. Anybody that's currently a student, you're going to continue to track them in teams like you always have. So for the last 3 columns here, I don't know, and I want feedback from you guys. How difficult would it be to take that class level information for these new students and then come back here and give me a cumulative total of direct, proxy, or training hours that they are receiving? So in the chat, go ahead and give us some feedback on that, yay or nay. This isn't something that I think that's crucial for us, but I think it would be good for us as a state to kind of know how many students got to 40 hours, how many students got to 60 hours that we potentially lost performance on. Yeah. That's why I have these 3 columns in here, is so that we can have that level of detail when we're reporting out both to our executive leadership here as well as to Octay. So that's the purpose for that. And then real quick, so give us some feedback on that in the chat. And then this other tab down here, which is titled Summary, what this basically does is it takes the information that's in the student tracker and it just puts it into some buckets for us. So total number of students, new students, total number of new students that don't have a signed enrollment form, total number of new students that don't have a signed release form. So it's basically just a summary of information that is collected on the student tracker. It helps us to break down, based off of that enrollment date that you tell us, how many new students you got in the month of March, how many new students you got in the month of April, how many you got in May. Because I feel like that's information, at least for us at the state level, we're going to find very useful when having conversations with our leadership about your ongoing efforts locally to continue to enroll students during the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
here.
kind of the tracker. Yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead. So people are providing some good feedback here. This one's a little side topic. I think I know the answer. Keegan Reed asked, long range question, would it be possible for the Pearl to be an application that's built into Teams, offered to providers? I think my response is that's the plan in the new version of Teams that we have in about 5 years. Correct, Mahalia?
Well, and I want to address one of the functionalities that is currently in Teams that you guys have access to. I don't think people use it. We kind of did this, I think, over a year ago. And originally the intent was so that you didn't have to go through painstaking process of redoing the profile every year. But in Teams right now, let's just say you're doing this over the telephone with an individual. You can open Teams right now and through the telephone, ask the questions, input that information into the profile and into Teams, and then you can actually click a button and export it out, and it puts it on a nice little form for you with a signature line. So if you are doing something through a telephone option, which I know some of you are having to kind of resort to that, you can go ahead and just document that information into Teams as it's happening. Click on the export option that has a signature line, and then you would want to, of course, protect the PII and send that via email or what have you. But you would at least have it in a form in the file. It just may need a signature. So that's something that, just in terms of capability, is available in Teams right now.
Okay, so Sharon Den from Dallas asked, would this be cumulative at the end of this manual tracking process, or would you want this provided to you monthly or quarterly? And there were several questions. Sandra Cortez asked, would the reporting totals be weekly or monthly?
Good question. So right now we are looking at, once we deploy this, I think we would want you guys to send this to us on a monthly basis. Continue to just add to the cumulative number. I think on a monthly basis, we would just want to kind of have a snapshot of what's going on at that point in time, at a grantee level for the month. But you could continue to just update it. You wouldn't have to create a new one every month. You could continue to date this and keep it as one document. We'll know when students are added based off of the enrollment date. It's another reason why we put that on there. So we could easily go back and filter through this to see when students came in.
Okay. Tara from Wharton Wharton College asked, just a suggestion, can TWC create a digital enrollment form with all the required items and share with providers so providers can send the form electronically to students to fill out and sign?
We could. And we've talked about that, I think, for years and years. The issue we always ran into was really that grantees wanted local flexibility in terms of what was on their enrollment forms and what the information they were asking students for. We always said, this is the minimum requirement that you need to meet for TWC and for purposes of this grant so that we can do our federal reporting. The feedback that we got was, yeah, but we want to, as a college or as an ISD or an organization, we want to add all of these sort of other elements to that because we do, tracking on all these other, things for our college or our organization. So, the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if people think that's a good idea, because I could see some utility for that. If you go back to Tara's message at 11:12 a.m. and give it a little heart or a thumbs up, then we can kind of see to what extent you guys would like to have us develop something like that. Ashley Trevino from Grayson asked, I think it would be very difficult. It would have to add up each time unless the state also released an hour tracking that calculates somehow.
Yeah, and we may do that. I mean, we're just so kind of, we've been putting out a lot of information, and that may be something that we want to look at. I'll talk to Anson about that and see if that's something that we want to do.
One person asked, could you explain total training hours again, please?
Total training hours would be if students are currently enrolled in an IET and they are still getting some sort of technical training. Some of our colleges are moving a little faster than others in terms of offering the remote training services or remote classes through the college. So if they're in an IET and they are getting total training or they are getting training hours, you would want to document that.
Tiffany Lee from Region 9 and Linda Fajoko from Region 17 both thought it would be a great idea if the online enrollment form could be built into Teams. That's to come in a few years when we have our new system built.
Yeah.
Irene Ramos, to clarify Eva's question, your form allows us to indicate the online DL curriculum a new student will be enrolled in, but where do we log track remote class that will be where the student will be enrolled? Our students are enrolled in both.
Yeah, so let me go over that one more time. So you would still track, and again, this is only for brand new students. Students that are already in Teams right now and you have been in classes at some point in time, prior to COVID-19 hitting, you would continue to track those in Teams as you always have. Those of you that are setting up remote learning options, you can, create a new class in Teams. You can continue to track them in the class that they're currently in Teams. That's maybe another webinar that we need to have just on that particular topic. But you can continue to track current students in Teams. These are going to be for new students that are coming in that we really we don't have any options available to us because they have no test to track them. So they would go on this spreadsheet. And if you had a hybrid class, you would just indicate here that they are in a distance learning model. And that would be based off of an approved NRS test. If they're only doing a remote learning and they're only getting direct contact hours, then you would just leave that blank on here. If they're getting both, then you would indicate on here that they are getting a distance learning model. So think about it in terms of teams. That's the easiest way for me to kind of to say this or have you guys think about this. In terms of teams, if they were in a brick and mortar class and doing distance education, how would that look in teams? That's basically how you would set it up in this tracker as well, which means they're just in a class, they're doing an ESL class, like a remote coursework on, you know, ESL general studies. That's their remote learning. And then they're also doing a hybrid and mixing that with a clock time model or, you know, whatever in terms of distance learning. So it's going to function the same way. If they're not doing any distance learning, then don't select a distance learning model on this form.
Johnine Maldonado from Tarrant County said, we could build our local tracker to accumulate hours for us and then report on your tracker. It will be a two-part process. Carrie Watts from Elcott, Literacy Council of Tyler, there in Tyler, Texas, said the exported version just has one signature. Will we need a signature for enrollment and for the signed release?
I think I understand what she's saying. So for in Teams, when you develop the profile and you export it, there's a signature for the profile information, but not for the signed release. Is that what she's saying?
Pretty sure, yeah.
Would she need two signatures? Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah. So on that one, if you were able to, you know, you need a signature on both of those. Some of you have elected to include the release of information sort of with your enrollment document as kind of one document, and they just sign at the bottom and everything is, you know, together. So you can have a signature, you would need a signature on both, or if you're going to include it as one document, you need a signature at least on, you know, at the end of that document. I don't know if that answers her question.
I think it does. And I was going to say to everybody, I want to thank you for your vigilance on accountability and all of that. It just shows very, very strong awareness of the importance of that. That being said, you know, we know not everybody's going to get it right because it's just a lot of things we haven't explored here. But thank you for the questions. It's helping us a lot. Julie Mendez from Alamo College's district asked, is hybrid learning, this is kind of a hybrid question, is hybrid learning considered a remote learning, or is the student required to be online remote for 6 hours to be counted, or can we divide it in Canvas and Zoom to be counted?
Well, my first response to that would be I would really encourage everybody to go back and review the guidance that we originally put out on remote learning versus distance learning, because I think that's really going to help you to kind of build some framework around those types of questions. And really all that has to do when we're saying remote learning is we're saying things that would qualify for direct contact hours versus things in distance learning, which only count as proxy hours. Distance learning is an approved curriculum through the state. Aztec, Burlington English, those types of approved curriculum. If that's what you're using to generate contact time, that contact time is defined as proxy. Anything that you're doing on Zoom or Canvas that is really synchronous learning with an instructor, and it's sort of that one-to-one time, you're going to create a class and you're going to be in there for 30 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour with that instructor delivering content, that is going to be a direct hour, and you would just consider that as a remote learning. And we put a lot of language in that FAQ that I think will help hopefully frame that up for everybody. But yeah, that's a really good question, but that's kind of how we're framing it up right now.
Mm-hmm. More questions on the electronic enrollment form in English and Spanish from Larry Zimmerman and Christy. Um, let's see here.
And if somebody could just make a note in either in the chat or in the notes, let's just, as a state, let's reach out and see what it takes to create maybe an electronic form utilizing our DocuSign system or something like that. Somebody just make a note for me.
Yeah. I posted the link to the TCall coronavirus page, which has the FAQ prominently placed in the quick links now. Thank you. To go look at the questions on remote learning. Several questions on remote learning. Michelle Lamont's had one. I'm just going through here.
And Anson, I'm going to go ahead and switch over, or actually, if you will go ahead and switch over, I think, to the FAQ.
Yeah.
Let's maybe go through some of those questions.
Yeah, let's do that. I agree. Hold on, folks. I'm going to switch to my screen. So the FAQ is under revision right now. And can everybody see it now? Showing up, Mahalia?
Yes.
Okay, good. So just to let everybody know, we have it's really like 10-page FAQ in the works. We'll probably scrub some of the questions out that are duplicative. We're just going to go through a few of them. These are draft. So if you're wildly taking snapshots of these with your phones, more power to you, but they could change by Wednesday or so when we get these published. But they do help us keep this conversation going. The first one, what information must be completed for new students served at a distance? Answer, all individuals must have a completed student served at a distance intake information to be included in the enrollment measures. New student served at a distance intake information includes completed enrollment form, including required Pearl elements, complete release of information form, Teams participant record and profile questions, and all the student tracker information, which we'll explain more of, and that's what we've been going over for this entire call. Mahalia, you want to, and these are roughly written, so if you see typos and all, don't point too many fingers at me. So Mahalia, any thing you want to add to that?
I don't think so. We've gotten several questions. Again, I will agree with Anson. I really appreciate everybody's feedback and providing us with some very specific questions that we can answer. We're going to do our best to answer whatever we can, but we had taken a couple of questions that we had received and kind of said, I think these are the ones that we're kind of in the safe zone right now in terms of answering. And then there are some that, again, we're waiting for Octave to comment and give us some additional guidance, which is supposed to be coming out Monday. So we may have a lot more information by the time this thing is finalized, but
okay, the next question. Starting. Thank you. The next question, self-attestation form. Will all new students served at a distance require a self-attestation form? Will this form be provided by TWC? Yes, all new students served at a distance required to complete an enrollment form that contains the Pearl elements as well as release of information form. Grantees should use the information obtained in the enrollment form and through interaction with the student to determine self-attested eligibility in the absence of a formal pretest. We've defined 3 options for self-attested eligibility during the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll report which option you're using on the new student tracker. So I think we've covered that pretty well. And if someone sees I'm not looking at the questions right now, but if somebody sees a question come in, Elena, would you flag us? Student intake profile. For new students served at a distance, if we are unable to administer the pretest, how are we supposed to complete the student profile? Answer, a participant record and profile must be completed in Teams. Class level information will be tracked outside of Teams for new students.
Anthony, you
It,
just got a question from Lawrence Zimmerman. He
okay.
says, when I agreed to automated registration form, it should have a translator built in for all languages.
Yes. Thank you, Lawrence. This is true because we have a lot of different languages out there for sure. Good feedback from Northeast ISD. Um, we had a lot of questions on 16 to 18-year-olds documentation. Do we still need documentation for 16 to 18-year-olds? Yes, CEA letter 0517 for self-attestation of out-of-school status. They must complete an enrollment form and release of information in addition to attesting to out-of-school status. PII, that's going to be the word on the street right now because we've got a lot of PII threats out there if we are not careful. Not all instructors may know how to save handwritten forms into password-protected PDFs. Some instructors may be sending a picture of the document. Is that okay? All information that contains PII must be protected. You can review WD letter 0218 for specific information on how to protect and store and transport PII. That being said, a picture of a document would be acceptable during these extraordinary times. There's actually additional response to this question that didn't get included in this screenshot here because we were writing it this morning, but I think we'll have in the response that you need to be extremely careful that if you are taking pictures of any kind of PII, that it's being sent one-to-one between the teacher or whoever's collecting information and the student, and not to like a chat group or something like that. Those could be things that could be easily accidentally done.
And I
Data
can I
uh
just say something?
Yeah.
Can I just say something on that particular piece? Um, just, and this is kind of maybe a common sense thing, but for you guys, I mean, we're going to try to be as flexible as we can so that you guys can come up with the innovation locally that you need to accomplish these things. But I would just say be very thoughtful in what you're developing. If there's any way for you to take PII out of the forms that you're using and do that over the phone, or do it in a two-step process, maybe, hey, let me get your contact information and your personal information over the phone, and then fill out this Pearl information, which is really just the individual's kind of status of where they are. You may want to, think through those processes and those procedures to protect the PII initially, just when you're developing your initial procedures. So I think you can be creative, but still really hold tight to protecting student information. We do not want to get to the end of this and then have, 1,500 data breaches and identity crisis and all kinds of stuff and get bad press. So just be very thoughtful. But I think there are creative and innovative ways that you guys can do workarounds for this than what we're used to. Just be careful.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the questions, Elena. Liz Moya from T-Call, she said that PD on kind of modifying PII processes to accommodate for what we're talking about would be good. My answer would be tag your it. That's a great idea. If you guys want to start thinking about that over there at T-Call, we would really appreciate that. And can we save these forms in a Google Drive only that gives appropriate staff access to view? I would say if you feel like you can address the requirements for PII in that WD letter, sure thing.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, kind of going back to having an initial process where you're getting the student kind of contact information or that general information, which is name, date of birth, gender, ethnicity, driver's license number, SSN, those types of things. creating that to where you're maybe doing that in person and then handling the rest of it, via email, then you're kind of removing the PII essentially from that. Because once you save that participant record in Teams, you will have a unique Teams ID number that you can use on documents to complete the enrollment process at that point. So just kind of think through some of that locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on these PII questions, I was going to share that our workforce boards are all going through similar process redesigns, and I learned this morning from Fabiana Ramirez on my team that they have some good answers on an FAQ related to PII, and that I think will address some of these questions about taking pictures and things like that. Marcia Ellis from Region 20 asked about, do we still need to collect ID information? The answer is yes, and we need to have that, again, protected. Okay, let's go ahead and go through some of these other questions. Great feedback, everybody. This is how we do it over here in Texas AEL. Question, if a program does intake for new students, how much time will programs be given to complete data entry, contact hours, class assignment, assessment information for new students which could not be assigned to a class in Teams without approved assessment? Answer, we're providing class level tracker to be used only for new students during this time. Programs should attempt to follow the same data entry schedules as always, monthly validation, complete data by the 15th of each month for the previous month's data. Mahalia, do you want to add to that based on our conversation with Adam?
Yeah, so we just had a conversation with Adam Leonard, who's our Department of Operational Insight director. So I've got some good news. I've kind of been working with them and of course, carrying your your concerns about all the variables that are in place right now in terms of data entry. So we're all in agreement that we're really shooting for an end of year, July 15th, to have all the data in either Teams or in these trackers reported at that time. So what I would say is for current students, that means students that you had in the program prior to COVID, continue to track those individuals in Teams. We're just not going to require the monthly validation that we have been, but I would just really stress that you still have a data entry process locally, that you're aiming to get those students into Teams as you go to this remote learning. You should be updating your data management processes for that. But in terms of just that monthly data validation or the data sign off, we're not going to expect that to happen until the end of the program year. So you guys are, that's probably good news for many of you as you're just trying to figure out how to do all of this. But continue to track and continue to keep up on, getting information into Teams. It's just that little monthly data validation where you have to validate all of your classes. We're going to remove that requirement, and Anson will be discussing this on probably the next call that we have. And we'll be getting some written, like an email TWC transmittal on that particular. So we're waiving the monthly data validation piece. But again, continue to track your stuff in Teams. That's how we know kind of what's going on out there in the field.
We got some other comments here, and I just wanted to tell everybody too, it sounds so rough when it says Elena Zockman removed somebody from the room. Elena Zockman's like the nicest person you'll ever meet. She's not removing anybody. It's just probably because she made the meeting. So apologize for that, and she'll add you in immediately. I think it's because we're over our limit that it's getting finicky like that. We had some other questions here. Tiffany Johnson, I may have missed this info, but if a student has a POP that closed, they start all over again, and then they go on to the tracker, ? This could create a duplicate situation both in Teams and on the tracker.
Hey, that's a really good question. And I don't know if we've been answering so many FAQs. I don't know if this is one we already have out there or this will be included in this document. So what we have said, and I think this resides in the attachment in the Outlook meeting maker. What we are saying is we're waiving the 150 for a test validity. So if you have a student who has formally exited and they are coming back to services, if they have a usable test that you can put them in teams, put them in teams. And that's basically 365 days. So 365 days from whatever day you're trying to add them to a class in Teams. If there is a usable test, you should put those individuals into Teams and not on the new student tracker. The goal is to get as many students into our data system as we can, because those are that's everything we use for performance, and we don't know yet how these new students that we're tracking externally are going to calculate for us in terms of performance measures and things like that.
So I want to recognize we're over time by 10 minutes. We're going to keep going though, but if somebody's got another appointment, of course you can take care of that. Oscar from Southwest Texas Junior College down there on the border has some wishful thinking. Just a thought, there used to be a Teams training module database. Would it be possible, easier to track new students directly into this module with relaxed required data fields assessment and the ability to upload certain complete files on the official Teams down the road?
I don't know. I'm happy to look into that. I don't know if that came over with us when we transferred to TEA. That may be a TEA controlled use, but I'm happy to look into that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. I lost everything. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, let's go ahead and continue on here. I did get a note that we have a hard stop at 12 because this session will end. This is another question. The last one we'll go over today, and keep in mind there's plenty more, but they're still very rough. Notating in Teams, academic skills, educational level determination. Guidance needed for where staff should notate in Teams the participant academic skills and educational level determination, and the tool resource used to make the determination. And then answer, completion of an enrollment form that has the Pearl elements will assist grantees in determining the student's eligibility. See new student enrollment section, intake, you can include comments in Teams under the participant record profile. A little rough there, but go ahead and walk through this one with us, Mahalia.
So right now, and basically I'm trying to utilize what we have available in Teams right now for you to document sort of these extraordinary circumstances that we're in. So since we do, for new students coming in, if we can't give them a pre-test and we're determining this self-attested eligibility because they don't have a high school diploma, for instance, or they're an English language learner, and we've defined that through the intake process, them completing the Pearl or a conversation that we're having with them and sort of the self-assessment that we're doing. There are two places in Teams that you can actually add like open text field and comments. The first option is under the actual profile. And Anson, if you scroll up a little bit. So the first, or down, the first option is under the participant's profile. There is an open text field that says additional information not indicated above. You can make a comment there just saying, COVID-19 eligibility, self-attested, or some sort of comment to that fact. The second option, continue down, is under the actual personal information. There's a comment section, and you are more than happy to put comments in there related to self-attested eligibility. These are going to be things that in the future, when you go back and look at these students, or we get to a place where we can put these students into Teams, you'll kind of have those flags in the system for those individuals. So right now, those would be my suggestions to you you to kind of document how you determined or which option you used. So you're taking that information that you're putting on that external tracker. So if you selected doesn't have a high school diploma, you can put that in the comment here. Those are things that are kind of collected through the Pearl already. So we kind of have it, but if you guys want to create a process that you really want your intake staff to kind of leave a comment in there for some things, those are your options.
Okay.
So I just wanted to include it in there.
Okay. Thank you, Mahalia, for helping to elucidate those questions. And folks will, like I said, this is a draft, so if you're taking pictures of this stuff, I completely believe I would too, but we'll be revising it next week for sure and cleaning it up. And we probably won't even get it completely right then, because this is a really fast-moving world of change for us. There were some other questions. Could you please clarify the test expiration dates?
That is probably that's probably a second question to the question about what students to put in teams that are returning students, I think. Yeah. So if you have someone that is currently has a profile and a participant record in teams, and let's just say they've been gone for 100 days, and they are coming back to you for services, and they have a test that's 200 days old or something like that. If you can utilize that baseline in teams, we would prefer for you to track these individuals in teams using that older test to establish the baseline in teams for those individuals. So the assessment guide, basically, we are saying 150 days. We would want you to retest students that are returning and coming back across a program year. We're waiving that right now. And we're saying if there's a viable test to what teams will accept, which right now is still 365 days, teams will still take. It will look back when you try to register a student for a class. What it does right now is when you do that class registration, it looks back to whatever test instrument you say. So if you select TABE on the drop down, or you select BEST on that drop down when you're enrolling the student in a class, it's going to look back and it's going to say, do I have a TABE assessment in the last 365 days that I can use as a precursor for placement in this class? And if the answer to that question is yes, then track those individuals into teams.
Related question, if we're waiving the test expiration date, are we waiving the 90-day exit of a POP?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, and I don't know if we even have the answer for that. We know for current students that have a period of participation or are in a period of participation right now, in terms of when they exit, if you don't put in a planned gap or they don't have an exclusionary reason or something like that, I mean, the exit is going to get established. That much, I mean, we know, because we're not able to kind of update any of that. So yeah, they will still be determined as an exiter after 90 days with 0 hours in teams.
Okay, excellent. Janice Hebner from Region 9 asked, will every new student need to complete a self-attestation form? The answer is yes, unless the answer is just flat out yes, right? Unless they're a returning student, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Irene Ramos was wanting some assurances that that we'd be receiving an email regarding the DSO and data validation guidance during this time, that these dates will be waived or flexed.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can either get out today, now that we have confirmation from our data department, or look for that on Monday.
Okay. Mahalia, I'm assigning that to you.
Okay. I think everybody knows whenever your TWC transmittals are prosed by Mahalia versus prosed by Anson anyway. Yeah. But yes, I can do that.
Thank you. Somebody asked, I don't know if it's a follow-on from the POP question, what if a student has exited So I think the question was, do they have to be retested? And that we addressed that in the FAQ.
Yeah.
Um, Christy Heyman asks, so would it be feasible for us to do a planned gap for those students who we do not serve digitally? That's addressed in the current FAQ, Christy, and definitely something that everybody wants to start considering. And Mahalia, you might want to add a little bit more information related to assigning planned gaps, but that's definitely something everybody should be looking at very carefully.
Yeah, plan gaps are a good option for us right now. On a large scale, it becomes a bit cumbersome because it is something that you have to put into teams on a monthly basis. It's not something that you can go in and say, well, we talked to a student and they're not going to attempt to come back till August, and we can just kind of put this plan gap that extends to August. You actually have to go into that participant record and update that planned gap every single month. And again, the plan gap, and I want to, this is kind of a high level overview, but the plan gap basically works like this. Think of it more of like a suspension in time. So if the student never comes back, the exit date is going to retroactive back to whatever the last service date or the last direct proxy or training hour is in Teams. So the plan gap works really well for students that are not able to move to a remote learning option, or if you don't have a remote learning option right now, but you plan on starting brick and mortar classes in July or something like that. A plan gap is a good resource, but there is some complexity there just in terms of staff time to go in and update that every single month, based off of what the student's telling you, which is, I'm coming back, I just can't right now because of all of these, these things that are happening in relation to COVID.
Mm-hmm. Michelle Lamont has a question or a comment, and I think it might be something we need to really think about too as we come out of this period. But she says, does the new tracking method only apply if you cannot provide an approved assessment?
Yes.
Yes. So what I'm saying is it could be in the future here that some of you will still not be out of your closures and you cannot provide assessments, and then some of you can because your institutions have opened at different times. Not everything's going to open on the same day, so there could be a moment in time when all of a sudden now you can have a testing session and people can come to your school, and then all of this guidance and all these tracking mechanisms become null and void essentially, for anybody new coming in. Eduardo
Yeah,
Arnold.
I was just going to say that's a really good point, in terms of the purpose for the new student tracker. This is the real purpose for this, or the reason and intent behind it, is because you cannot attach a student into a class in Teams if they don't have some sort of test that can be used as a baseline. That's why we're having to create the external tracker. So as we get additional information on virtual proctoring of these NRS approved tests and those come online, if they come online quickly, great, that allows us to go back to kind of business as usual when it comes to tracking students in Teams.
Eduardo Arnold from Far West Consortium says, can the eligibility self-attestation be included in the student application with the rest of the Pearl elements and release of information?
Yeah, and this is where you guys will have, it kind of goes back to that local flexibility of additional questions you may want to ask on the enrollment form. So in addition to the Pearl, since we have released guidance that kind of say self-attested eligibility at this time, since we can't really do a baseline or a pre-test option, you could include those as questions that you ask on the enrollment form if that helps you to fill out the external tracker for new students.
Very good. Eva Cantwell asks, why does everyone need a self-attestation? What are they attesting to? We use it in lieu of a parent's signature and to verify students who are not enrolled in high school. What will the others be attesting to?
Um, so that's a good question, Eva. People are calling this self-attestation, which really is just an enrollment form. It's really just we're still requiring you to complete the intake process, which is an enrollment form, a release of information, and then for students who are within the compulsory age of attendance, and those compulsory laws, then you have to do the age-related eligibility, which is also self-attested. So I'm getting like where it's a little bit confusing. So the self-attested, I mean, when we're saying that, it's just basically all new students coming in still need an enrollment form. They still need a release of information. And then for students who are between the ages of 16 and 18, they still fall under AEL letter 0517, and they would need that additional self-attested documentation to say, I am out of school. And here's my self-attested proof as to how I'm documenting that I am an out-of-school individual.
Yeah, and I kind of ran across this challenge myself, like because there's also the issue of the provider kind of attesting to the eligibility, since there's no test. They're basically using some somewhat more subjective method to determine if someone lacks, has basic skills deficiency or is an English language learner. We'll try to work on those terms. I can see the confusion now. Really good point, Eva. Tiffany Johnson asked her question backwards, which was fun. So she says, do we need, from Victoria College, do we need to do a planned gap if the student has already earned an MSG for the year? I believe is what her question is.
So the planned gap serves as one function, and the only function of a planned gap is to extend, is to keep a period of participation open. Yes. That is the purpose of a planned gap, and that's the only purpose of a planned gap. It doesn't take students out of an MSG performance. It doesn't do anything. The only thing a planned gap is going to do is going to keep a period of participation open for up to 180 days after the participant is no longer getting direct or proxy hours. That's really the function of that planned gap.
And so if they exit, though, then they fall into the exit-based measures.
Correct.
So if you're, it could be the case if you're just saying, well, I'm not going to do a planned gap because I already got my MSG performance. The student exits, they're going to fall into the measures and count against you until they make those measures. But then they, say school opens and they come back, then you have, basically a new POP. And another round of exit-based measures. So that's what's going on kind of in the performance. Sandra Cortez asked, does this apply to Accelerate Texas as well? Yes. Just about everything in this guidance, whether it's on new students or the other guidance related to all the other FAQs, apply to any of the programs that are serving students. There's a few exceptions, and we're going to note those and probably in the next round. The exception I noted yesterday was there's not a requirement Accelerate Texas to do a distance learning plan, for example. But by and large, you're operating an Accelerate Texas service delivery for students in the same way if it was for your regular grant out there in Laredo. So other questions, Tara, again, appreciate all the people coming back for more on the questions because it's good questions. And just to make sure I understood correctly, so if a participant is out for 90 days or more, can't we enroll the participant in remote learning if the participant wants to return?
And the answer to that is yes, of course. Just like, current students that may leave, if they come back, we just want to have a mechanism for tracking them. And So if I'm understanding her question correctly, so if a participant is a former participant, meaning they're a returning participant, and they're coming back for services, what we're really talking about in terms of the tracker or anything else is, do you need to track them in teams as you always have, or do you need to track them on the external tracker? In terms of the enrollment process, that is still the same. So if they're an exiter and they're coming back, you would want to make sure that you follow and get a new enrollment form on that individual, a release of information, and kind of go through that process just as you normally would. And then you would need to determine, after you get that enrollment form and the release of information, where you would track those students in terms of their remote learning. You're either going to be able to track them in teams if they have a test in the last 365 days of their return, or if not, you would track them on the external tracker.
We got one more question because we're at time, and then a comment. So, if a student has exited the program 90 days without participation, but have used our services before, therefore we have a usable score in Teams, will they receive credit for their hours?
Yes. If you, because you're going to track them in teams, then it would just be kind of business as usual in terms of their hours. So yes.
Okay. And then, oh, I just opened up another chat. So the comment, so we're going to end up here. For some levity, somebody messaged Elena that she is Thanos. I'm not exactly sure who Thanos is. That shows how out of the loop I am. But um, I'm sure there's others out there in my boat. So also, Lori Slayton on my team said that we have the chat pod and the recording, and we will post it like the other calls. So we'll try to turn that around as soon as possible. So I want to thank everybody for your time. I have a performance meeting in 30 minutes, and I've got to eat some lunch. So thank everybody. Keep the questions coming. This was really useful, I think. So when you agree, Mahalia?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to turn this stuff around. It looks like we're going to have a really busy weekend, or I will, because I'm going to really want to get this thing out there. And we appreciate everybody thanking us for everything. But if you didn't get your question answered, or if you think of one after the call, send it to aelta@twc.state.tx. I'll pick it up. Maria will pick it up, and we'll be turning that stuff around. Signing out. Wish everybody a great weekend. Be safe. Go see if you can find a roll of toilet paper or a bottle of bleach if you're running out. And at least get some peace of mind for yourself and enjoy the weather. It's supposedly going to be pretty nice. Thank you. Bye bye.